Wesley belted laughter and slapped me on the back as we stepped off the road and started along the train tracks.
You're one sick,
He said, still laughing.
You never heard that one before?
I said, smiling.
Dirtiest joke I know.
We'd both been drinking. I was a bit drunk, and thought Wesley was too. It had been too long since we'd been out together. Off in the distance, I heard a train horn. The freight trains ran like clockwork through our little town. This one would pass through at 11:35.
You're coming over for a drink, right?
Wes asked. I shrugged.
Sure, why not? When I told Olivia we were going out together, she suggested I invite you over afterward. Been a while since the three of us hung out. Yeah, how is Olivia?
I asked.
Oh, she's fine. You haven't talked to her lately?
There was something in his voice that put me on edge. The train horn sounded again, getting closer.
No, not for a while,
I said. We continued on, chatting, as the train grew ever closer. Pretty soon, the locomotive's light shined around the curve behind us.
Train's coming,
I said, glancing over to look. Something struck me on the side of the head, and I fell next to the tracks. That wasn't supposed to happen.
What the fuck?
I yelled, turning to see Wes coming at me again. I wasn't sure what he hit me with, because his hands were empty. Then I realized it must have been his elbow. He tried punching me, but I warded the blow off with my hand and then scrambled to my feet. The train didn't slow much coming through our tiny little town. It was going probably 45 miles an hour. It wasn't far now.
What are you doing, Wes?
I said.
What's your problem? Fucking my wife!
He yelled, coming at me again. But he didn't get far, because he was hit in the head from behind with a baseball bat. He stumbled, trying to turn around, but fell on his ass on the tracks. He looked up to see his wife Olivia standing there with the baseball bat.
What?
He said. I stepped over and kissed her, taking the bat out of her hands.
You haven't heard the one about the idiot who abuses his wife? So she goes to his best friend for help and they end up falling in love? Oh, Wes, it's a good one. But that's not even the punchline. The life insurance policy she took out on him, that's the punchline.
Still shocked, Wes stared at us, realizing he'd been set up. The train was close now, but it was dark on this stretch, and the locomotive's light only reached so far. Wes tried to get up, but I stepped over and clocked him again with the bat. He fell limply onto the tracks and didn't move again. Olivia and I ran into the trees nearby and watched to make sure everything went to plan. As soon as the engineer saw Wes on the tracks, he put the brakes on, but it wouldn't stop in time. There was no way. When I saw the train's wheels go over Wes's body, I turned to Olivia.
Why did he attack me? What did you tell him?
Olivia shrugged.
I might have told him you raped me and that you needed to die for it.
What? Why?
A girl's gotta hedge her bets. But when it came down to it, I hit him with the bat, not you.
Let me guess,
I said.
His life insurance policy is bigger than whatever one you took out on me. Is that right?
Olivia smiled slyly.
Maybe,
she said. Something occurred to me.
Wait, so was he really beating you? Was that part true?
Olivia looked up into my eyes, and she smiled again. It was hot inside the hazmat suit, but I was glad for it. On the first project I'd ever worked, I was paranoid about the suit ripping open. But I quickly got over that. We checked the suits before putting them on, making sure they were airtight. Still, wearing one took some getting used to. The guy I was working with today was a little older than me. His name was Ted Redman, and we were walking side by side down a corridor of trees that flanked the railroad tracks. As far as I could see, there were train cars on their sides all along the track that curved away to the right. Some of them were broken, their contents spilled out into the woods and soaked into the ground. It would be a massive cleanup effort, and our team was just the beginning. Back behind us, there were dozens of other men in hazmat suits, most of them carrying similar equipment that me and Ted hauled around. We were on point, working our way down the line while the others went behind us, searching for anything we might have missed. Helicopters flew overhead in the cloudless July sky. There were roadblocks set up to keep civilians away from the area. The spotters in the helicopters would radio down if they saw anything that needed to be investigated. From what we'd been told, the train was nearly 2 miles long. We'd be out here all day. A bush was up ahead, prompting Ted and I to stop. We waited, not wanting to go into the trees if we didn't have to. And a moment later, a small animal that had once been a squirrel skittered drunkenly out from under the bush. It was about double the size of your average squirrel, with strange growths protruding from its body. It squealed when it saw us and darted forward. When it did that, I could see that it had 2 mouths growing out of its deformed head, along with 3 eyes. It was headed straight for Ted, so I let him do the honors. He depressed his trigger and a tongue of flame shot out the end of his flamethrower, racing to meet the deformed animal. It didn't take much. Ted let up on the trigger and stepped aside as the flame-engulfed thing squealed in pain and ran back into the woods. It had been a wet summer, thank goodness, so we didn't have to worry about starting a forest fire. The squirrel fell down dead before it got even 2 yards into the woods, the flames sputtering as they slowly died down.
I wonder what makes them try to attack,
Ted said as we resumed our trek. Who knows what kind of crazy shit is in these chemicals, I said, gesturing at the nearest broken transport tank. It's like they create a chemical that, I don't know, makes for a long-lasting cooking pan. But when it's in liquid form, you better watch out, because it'll turn you into a fucking monster before killing you in the most slow and painful way possible.
Gotta love human ingenuity,
Ted said sarcastically. We're just not too good at thinking about the consequences of our actions, I said. Look throughout human history. You'll see the same things played out over and over again. And it's usually the people who don't matter that take the brunt of those mistakes. Poor people. And the worst part is, we don't learn from those mistakes. We just keep making the same ones, over and over again.
You're a fucking ray of sunshine today,
Ted said. Yeah, well, I've been reading too much news.
Fuck the news.
With that proclamation, we fell silent and continued on our way. Up ahead, one of the chemical tanks had fallen in such a way that it blocked our path. We'd have to skirt it by going through the trees. We found what looked like a game trail and started into the heavy green foliage. Something moved up ahead in the trees. Something big. Ted and I looked at each other through our helmet visors and then split apart, heading toward the source of the noise in a flanking maneuver. The idea was to get close enough to burn the thing without letting it know we were there first. But as we were just getting into the effective range for our flamethrowers, the thing burst out from behind the branches. It was a deer, as I could tell from the antlers. It had 2 noses and 4 eyes, and it reared up on its back legs, which were covered with strange blackish lumps. Its fur bulged with undulating growths as if something inside it was trying to burst out. It grunted loudly as it came back onto all 4s. Then it charged me. Both Ted and I shot long tongues of flame at the animal, quickly coating it in fire. But it kept coming. My finger remained on the trigger as I stood my ground, sure the thing would go down before it reached me. It wasn't like I could run away. That was a good way to rip a hazmat suit. Plus, the 2 flamethrower tanks on my back weren't the lightest things. The deer was close now, and I had no idea how it was still standing. It was completely engulfed in flames.
Run!
Ted shouted. I backpedaled, but I didn't run. The deer was closing, its flaming antlers bucking as it came. Then, when it was about 5 yards away, its front legs stopped working, and the flaming animal went down. I stepped away, afraid of melting my suit, and took a moment to appreciate that I was still alive and uninjured.
Christ, that was a close one,
Ted said.
Never seen one last that long.
I hadn't either, but I didn't say so. We continued on, angling through the forest so we could get back to the tracks. But then we heard something else. This time, it wasn't the rustling of a bush. It was crying. A child, crying. Ted and I looked at each other, grim-faced, and then headed toward the sound. As we got closer, we could hear someone trying to hush the child. Judging by the sound, the people were on the other side of a small hill. Ted and I hurried up the hill and quickly spotted a family of 3, a man, a woman, and their young child. I couldn't tell whether the child was a boy or a girl because it was so badly deformed. One of its hands had split between the middle and ring fingers, and one of its eyes had developed 2 irises. Its body was covered with undulating lumps. The parents weren't much better off. They looked up at us for just a moment. It was all they had, a moment, because Ted and I depressed our triggers and shot flames out at the 3 people. They didn't charge us like the deer and squirrel had. They just died, screaming. When they were just a charred conglomeration of melted flesh, I said, "I'm glad we're getting double pay for this shit." Ted ignored me, looking off into the distance.
Look at that,
he said, pointing with the tip of his flamethrower. I looked that way, between a couple of trees and down into a small valley. I could see where the front of the train had gone off the tracks, right in the middle of a tiny town nestled in the valley. I could also see where teams of people were going from house to house with semi-automatic rifles. I knew from prior experience that they would shoot anyone inside. Then other people would come behind them and torch the houses. Many of the houses in the 300-person town were already on fire. It would be attributed to an earthquake, or a gas leak, or a flood, or some other bullshit. That was beyond my pay grade. "Still got a long way to go to get down there," I said. "Better get back to it."
Yeah, about 1.5 miles,
Ted said. We turned and headed back toward the train tracks, leaving the torched family smoldering behind us. It felt like the train was airborne. I'd heard the screeching of the brakes as the engineer tried to slow the train, but we were going too fast. There was a moment of weightlessness just before the chaos and the screaming. A moment in which my stomach fluttered with excitement and dread. And the car was off the tracks. The world was spinning. I couldn't tell if it was something crashing into me or me crashing into something that caused the breathtaking pain in my ribs. The world came back into focus, and I found that I was lying on one of the windows of the passenger car. The train car was on its side. I was tangled up with a woman who was unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell which. There were other people all around, some of them draped over seats, others crumpled awkwardly, and still others having somehow ended up in the luggage racks that lined the roof above the seats. Okay, there's been a derailment, I thought to myself. We've crashed. It happens sometimes. But that was before I knew the truth. That was before I started wishing that it was just a derailment. If that was all it had been, I probably wouldn't be writing this story down. Aside from the pain in my ribs, I was okay. I helped people as much as I could, but there was a lot of blood and many broken limbs. I had no first aid kit and no medical expertise beyond what I'd gleaned from television shows, movies, and my inglorious years as a Boy Scout. So I decided to venture out into the night to see if I could flag down first responders who I figured would be arriving soon. After all, we were on the East Coast. There's not a lot of empty space between cities, and I was sure 911 had been called by numerous people already. I was able to get out into the night through a door at the end of the car. I peered toward the front of the train, unable to see what had caused the wreck. Walls of trees lined the railroad tracks, although some of them had been crushed by rolling train cars. Other passengers were wandering around, many of them dazed and bloody. I spotted a woman who was moving with purpose up toward the front of the train. She looked like she was uninjured and had some plan in mind. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Calling after her, I started that way. She didn't hear me. Still, I kept my eyes on her as I jogged, wincing at the pain the movement caused me. But then a very odd thing happened. A person darted out of the trees and pulled the woman back into the foliage. At least I thought it was a person. It was hard to tell. There was the briefest of screams from that direction before the noise was cut off. Rushing toward the spot in the trees, I could only think that some psychopath was trying to take advantage of the chaos by doing something unspeakable to the woman. I ran straight into the foliage, immediately spotting a rustling bush about 5 yards away. Marching over with only my sense of righteous indignation to protect me, I parted the bush, getting ready to catch the psychopath in the act. What I saw there nearly made me laugh. It was so unfathomable. I thought it could only be a joke. There was a strange figure standing on 2 stout legs, which were splayed over the woman lying on the ground. Each leg ended in a foot, not unlike an elephant's. But the figure was nowhere near the size of an elephant. The legs ended at a bulbous mass that reminded me of the two-legged walking war machines from the Star Wars movies. Only instead of being made of metal, the entire thing was made of gray flesh. And instead of guns mounted on the chin, there were two gangly arms sticking out, with two more sprouting out near where the legs met the body. These four arms held the woman down while the creature had its mouth open. The mouth, which looked to be nothing more than a puckering hole in the underside of its bulbous body, had dozens of small worm-like creatures extending out. These creatures were attached to the writhing woman, seeming to suck her dry. In fact, she shriveled before my eyes. A crashing of branches nearby prompted me to turn that way, seeing another of these two-legged creatures bounding toward me, forward arms reaching out, three-fingered hands grasping air as if in preparation. I got out of the trees and ran toward the front of the train as fast as I could. I yelled at people to run, as if that would help. I wasn't sure if the creature was still following me, but I wasn't about to waste precious momentum finding out. But as I neared the front of the train, I slowed, unable to help myself. I saw what the train had hit. It was a massive egg-shaped thing, 15 stories tall and at least as many wide. Even in the limited light, I could tell that it was yellow-white with irregular green spots. Where the train had struck it, the thing had torn open, and hundreds of smaller egg-shaped things, each about the size of a refrigerator, had spilled out. It didn't take me long to realize that they were eggs. Some of them had split open, leaving empty, rubbery shells behind. And even as I stopped running to look at the science fiction scene before me, some of the eggs were splitting open to reveal those strange two-legged creatures. I can't honestly tell you how I got away from that place alive. I was lucky. Only a few of us made it. But even then, we weren't safe. There had been so many of the giant eggs placed around the world, and now we're in the middle of a war for the human race. But maybe, one day, someone, some human, will find this diary and be happy in the knowledge that we won. I'm afraid I won't see that day, but I'll keep fighting for it as long as I'm alive to do it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.